Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Mary Kate DeLuco. I'm a communications consultant here at Death Penalty Focus. And before we start, I just wanted to remind you that this webinar will be recorded and will be available online in about a week. We will send out an email to all registrants when it is up and ready to be viewed with the link to the webinar. And now I'd like to introduce you to our DPF Board President, Mike Farrell, who is our moderator and will introduce you to our guests. Thank you again for being here. Mike.
Thanks, Mary Kate. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. Excuse my scratchy throat. Our guests today are Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, Executive Director Maria DeLiberato and Communications Director Bridget Maloney. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Well, you're welcome, and we're thrilled to have you. I have to say, the two of you are heroes in my eyes, and I think I speak for everyone in the abolition movement when I say that you're heroes. FADP is the only organization in Florida solely dedicated to this effort to stop what can only be described as the state's frenzied pace of executions. So far this year, the state has killed 7 people. Most recent occurring yesterday when Thomas Godinez was executed by lethal injection. And an 8th execution is scheduled for next month. And there's some questions about that. Florida now leads the country in the executions in 2025 as the only 2 staff members of FADP are it when it comes to alerting people to this frenzy, organizing opposition, and educating supporters of the legal and human rights that are being violated. Maria, I understand you're also a capital defense attorney.
Yes.
So, how are you doing under all this pressure? How do you handle what seems to be an overwhelming workload between your work and your law practice?
It's a great question. We'll see. I have a giant sign on my I'm a public defender, and my office door right now that says "Do not knock." We'll see if anybody actually takes that to heart. It's definitely, it's really challenging to manage both. And yet for me, it's really important. My daily lawyer work serves my abolition work and vice versa. I think it gives me an opportunity to know all the cases, to know the lawyers who are doing this work, to have a sense. I've been to death row hundreds and hundreds of times as a lawyer. So I think it's sort of a cycle, they serve each other. But the pace of executions, like you said, it's definitely really, really, really difficult right now. It's the most overwhelmed that I have been in my 22 years of capital work in Florida.
Well, bless, excuse me, bless you for that and for what you do. Bridget, as communications director, you're responsible for getting the word out to supporters, the media, beginning and end of every capital case, the trial, the verdict, appeals, death warrant. And you do all this while you're attending law school? That sounds stressful, to put it mildly. How do you do it?
Thank you. That is also a great question. And the answer is surprisingly easily. And I say easily because I was accepted to law school about a week after I accepted the position full-time with FADP. And Maria had just come on at that time. And so I called her and I said, what do I do? Do I go? Do I stay? And she said, I think you can do both. And I said, that sounds like a lot. And it has informed my education so much more than I ever expected. And it's almost a relief to get to go to school and use everything that we learn about a case, everything we learn about Florida laws, especially being in New York, and sharing that with colleagues who feel very similar to how we feel and haven't been exposed to that before. And we don't have a death penalty in New York. So it's always really fascinating to see how things can be handled without a death penalty in the criminal sphere. It is very, very stressful. But I do think that the fact that you're working with lawyers and then you're learning how to be a lawyer is such an incredible opportunity. And because I'm not working as like a legal intern necessarily with FADP, it really gives me the room to sort of absorb and observe what the amazing people like Maria are doing. And of course, she's a fantastic mentor as our ED and also to me as a law student. So I think it makes us better at our work. And I think it makes me a better person and better student, and just all around sort of more understanding of meeting people where they are and really recognizing that everybody's sort of dealing with their own things. Finally, it has forced me to sort of step back and take pauses and take better care and, you know, organize life and time and say no to things that I don't like to say no to. But I think that's also a part of being in your 20s too, is sort of wanting to do everything and then realizing you can't. But it's been wonderful. And I love my school. So shout out to Pace Law School. It's been a wonderful home to me for the last few years. And I'm looking forward to getting to call it my alma mater.
Well, help me understand. You said in New York or from New York?
I am from New York, Westchester, to all my friends, little north of the city. I went to school at University of Tampa, which is how I got involved in all of this. And I was choosing between attending law school in Florida or in New York, back and forth. And I knew I wanted to practice in Florida and decided that being home in New York, where I could stay at home and focus and work at the same time, Pace allows a full-time working program. So I'm actually surrounded by people who are doing full-time jobs and have families and children. So it's just been an amazing experience.
Well, bless you both for what you're doing. So Governor Ron DeSantis has shown a real enthusiasm for state killing, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Editorial in the Orlando Sentinel pointed out that Governor DeSantis, and I'll quote the paper, will finish his second term having carried out 48 executions, the most in Florida since records have been kept, if he continues at his current accelerated rate. It then asks why the sudden rush and answers its own question with another question. Is it another sign that he's planning another run for president in 2028, I should say? So, what do you think is behind this zeal for state killing? Could it be that DeSantis thinks human sacrifice is the key to becoming president in 2028?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start and then I'll let Bridget fill in. I think it's a lot of things. It is definitely politically motivated. I think it's for us and sort of having the benefit of having done this for so long and been in a period of time. Rick Scott, of course, had the previous record for the most number of executions in 2013 and 2014. And then I think what happened was the Parkland case, which was a school shooting in Broward County, a young man who was severely mentally ill, wreaked a lot of havoc on a Broward County school and received a life sentence in the fall of 2022. And Florida at that time had a unanimous requirement. There was a brief period of time where we had unanimity required in jury sentencing. That's one of the most outrageous things about Florida's death penalty is you only need 8 of 12 jurors to get a death sentence. But for a period of time, the U.S. Supreme Court told us we had to have unanimity. And so the Parkland shooting, the Parkland verdict came down and 3 jurors voted to spare this young man's life. The irony, of course, is they had offered 37 consecutive life sentences from literally the moment he was arrested, and the state instead insisted on trying to get their pound of flesh. But he received a life sentence, and the backlash was immediate and swift, and that coincided with DeSantis's presidential run. So he really kind of had the perfect platform, a story where he could say this was outrageous. So he made a priority to the legislature to change the law back to non-unanimity. And then I think when he did that, he decided that he needed to also start the killing. So it was ironic, and it's sort of some of the way you asked sort of how we cope. We honestly cope with dark humor sometimes a little bit. We have to. But I was actually climbing Mount Kilimanjaro in January of 2023. And so I was on the mountain and didn't really have cell signal for like 8 days. And I came off the mountain, and Governor DeSantis had signed a death warrant of Donald Dilbeck, and the legislature had proposed this non-unanimity. And I turned on my phone, and just 100 horrible things were happening. And Bridget was like, "Where are you? This is the worst time to be on a mountain." She knew, of course, that's where I was. And I was just like, I'm going back to the mountain. I don't want to do this. But he signed Dilbeck's warrant, who happened to be an 8-4 vote, which was what they were pushing in the legislature. So sort of from that moment in January of 2023, we knew that this was a political thing. And then it continued, but then it stopped, right? His presidential run didn't go anywhere. And then he didn't set any more executions until it was Michael Zach was the last one in 2023. And ironically, that was a heartbreaking execution for a bunch of reasons, not the least of which my exonerated client went with me to the execution vigil. But Michael Zach's last words were, I pray for you, I forgive you, I love you all. And he actually sent a message to Governor DeSantis, like, I forgive you, which was just remarkable. And the execution stopped. And then it was in the summer of 24 where like a bunch of newspaper reporters questioned us and a bunch of other people saying like, hey, you were killing all these people when you were running for president. Why did you stop? And I was like, please don't write that article. Please don't like poke the bear, literally. And they published it. And lo and behold, a week later, he signed the execution warrant for Lauren Cole, who was a survivor of the Dozier School, which is a horrific school in Florida. They signed a compensation bill for Dozier survivors, and then like the next week signed Lauren Cole's death warrant. So that was the only one in 2024. And then, you know, we in 2025, the legislative session had a lot of death penalty bills. And then he started up. I mean, this pace is even faster than 2023. So it to me, it only seems to be, it's coinciding, I think, with obviously President Trump's directive to have the, you know, to focus on the death penalty. Of course, the United States AG is our former AG. Pam Bondi is the former Attorney General in Florida. So a lot of these death sentences are hers, the product of her office, securing them and defending them. So I think it's I mean, it has to be political. There's no other reason for it. But the real answer to your question is nobody knows because he won't say.
Just a brief aside, the eight verdicts will give a death sentence. That's been tested at Supreme Court.
So yes, in 2016, the United States Supreme Court said Florida's non-unanimous death penalty scheme was unconstitutional, and we had to switch it, and we did. And then our state Supreme Court said it's also unconstitutional under the state constitution, and they passed 12-0. And then our state Supreme Court majority shifted because of DeSantis's political appointments, and they said, just kidding, it is not unconstitutional under our state constitution. And they read the U.S. Supreme Court's decision like super narrow. I could get into like a whole constitutional law debate, which I won't do. But the short answer to your question is the U.S. Supreme Court has said Florida's scheme is unconstitutional when it was non-unanimous. Now we've made it non-unanimous again. It will eventually go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. But of course, the U.S. Supreme Court doesn't have to take cases. And there was about 14-year period between 2002 and 2016 where non-unanimity was being argued, and they didn't take Florida's case until 2016. So it is unconstitutional 100%. Is the US Supreme Court going to say that at some point? Yes. How many people are going to die in the meantime? A lot. So, I mean, yes, it's wrong. Yes, it will be fixed, but not yet.
Okay. I'm sorry, Bridget, I turned things aside. So
No, don't worry. I'm always very, I should share, my background is in applied sociology and marine biology, but I'm always thinking of us as a sociologist when doing this work. And it is no surprise to anybody that I am, you know, Democrat and anti-death penalty and sort of all of those things. But I try very hard to really take a look at the situation and not be clouded by my anger or feelings about the particular person. So I want to first recognize that as long as this is a thing in Florida, it can be used for whatever reason. And like Maria said, it's something that's always very fascinating to me is that Governor DeSantis is responsible for the longest period in Florida's history without executions. I mean, he will leave having the longest time without executions from 2019 to 2023, and also leave potentially executing the most people in Florida's history. And Maria is right that we are always picking up on these sort of threads when there are bills and there are cases that coincide with those bills. And I can certainly tell you that all of the reasons we've been told it's happening for safety, deterrence, cost, all of the reasons why people are told they should support the death penalty, none of those things are happening. Just on our vigil just the other day, I had said, if we had executed 6 people in 2023 and that was supposed to protect us and that was supposed to make things better, then why did we have to come back 2 years later and do 7? And why have we had to do over 100? And how many will it be until we start to see those benefits that we were promised? And so until someone comes out and says, oh, here are the reasons why we've executed all these people and here are the benefits of doing so, it's a lot of assumptions, which is an incredibly dangerous position to be in when we're talking about life and death, when you have to really think and observe and assume what your governor and state are doing. It's especially with the highest number of death row exonerees. Like, we need the most transparency, whether you're for it or against it. We deserve to know the way it's being used, why it's being used, and if it is political, we deserve to know that as well. It's nobody wants to come out and sort of say that or anything at all. But that's my bit, is that I do think it's fascinating how the only consistent thing in all of this through Florida's history is how it's been used at the governor's discretion, not just this governor, throughout history, without really a rhyme or reason.
I saw the editorial board of the Sun Sentinel, the sister paper to the Orlando Sentinel, wrote an editorial about DeSantis and his zeal for the death penalty, with a disturbing angle. In his appeal, Godinez's lawyer, Ali Shakur, pointed out that the Godinez case was his 4th death warrant case, the lawyer's 4th death warrant case since last July. That means he handled half of all the pre-execution appeals heard and denied by the court in the same period. He said it was what he called an unusual pattern. And it's striking that this lawyer could have had that many death warrant cases when you consider there are 61 lawyers handling post-conviction capital appeals. Sun Sentinel then says it called it a profoundly disturbing question. So I'll put that question to you. Is the governor's office selecting inmates to die because of who their attorney is? And if so, what does that mean in terms of fairness?
Yeah, I mean, I know Ali, and I actually used to work in that office that he works in still. And I mean, I read all of that. Of course, it's alarming. And of course, knowing him sort of personally as I do, it's also like I am worried about his mental health, because it's really, really difficult. This work is really difficult. But I don't know the answer. Either they are, and that's cruel in and of itself, or they're so sort of inept or unaware. Because the other thing that they're doing, and I don't remember if the article mentioned it, but for some reason they've accidentally, I'll use the air quotes here, served Ali with other death warrants that were not his client. So, and I don't, having been a capital defense lawyer, I've had 2 clients executed over the years. Like, there is nothing more terrifying than getting an email from the governor's office, because it means one of your clients is going to die. And so this poor lawyer has gotten emails, not just for the 4 clients that were killed, but for 6 other ones that weren't his. And so do they not understand? Are they lazy? Are they inept? Or are they exceptionally cruel? Again, it's very alarming, but we don't know. We don't know how they choose. I have no idea if the governor is well, I don't like that office, so I'm going to pick that office. Just sort of as an overview, the way Florida is set up in its post-conviction work, there are 3 offices who do post-conviction work. There's basically state public defender offices. They only represent people on Florida's death row. So the large majority of the cases, there's a handful of we call them registry lawyers that are outside those 3 offices. But for the most part, each death warrant is going to come from one of those 3 offices. But each of those offices has about, 70 to 90 cases. So, and they each have 10 to 15 lawyers. So it's very, very alarming and disturbing that Ali has gotten this sort of target and also been served on cases that aren't his. So yeah. Is it targeting, are they targeting him, or are they just so inept? I'm not really sure. Both are equally troubling.
Yeah, they are. It's always been, to me, and for knowing the work you do, a question of the cost to you, the attorney, when your client, for whom you've given time and energy and care and love and treated like a human being and fought for, is executed by the state. The cost of that is beyond my imagination, and I find this incredibly, incredibly painful to think that these things are happening in our country all the time and in your state at such a rate. DeSantis just signed 3 bills into law in the past 2 years that greatly expand the state's death penalty, and all 3 are unconstitutional as far as I can tell. One expands the death penalty eligibility to a person convicted of the rape of a minor. Another requires a mandatory death sentence for any undocumented immigrant. This sounds like President Trump, convicted of a capital felony. And the most recent adds another aggravating factor to consider in a capital trial. That bill makes it easier to simply apply death sentences to defendants found guilty of murder if the crime occurred at school or a religious gathering or a public government gathering. In 2008, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the death penalty in cases where no murder was committed is unconstitutional under the 8th and 14th Amendment. He's banking on having these votes with his Supreme Court to uphold these unconstitutional bills, is he?
Yeah, and it's actually especially troubling because we of course watched all the debates and argued in the legislature, and they were like, they're like, we know it's unconstitutional and we don't care. We think they'll change. They are banking on the U.S. Supreme Court receding from Kennedy v. Louisiana, because the other problem that nobody seems to talk about, when I talked to the legislature, I explained to them, but Florida has what we call a conformity clause in our Constitution that says our Supreme Court has to construe the 8th Amendment, which is what this would be, the cruel and unusual clause, in accordance with the U.S. Supreme Court. So our very conservative Supreme Court, which I'm very sure would love to have the death penalty for all the things, they have to say it's unconstitutional. So it's not like our state could say, because of course the U.S. Constitution is a floor, right? States are always allowed to give more rights, but they're never allowed to give less. And so what will happen sort of procedurally in these cases, and there are a few of them pending throughout the state right now, is if and when there's a death sentence that is handed down, again, by a majority, 8-4, our Supreme Court will have to find it unconstitutional. I mean, the circuit court judge should say, I'm not allowed to impose the death penalty here. And so it's really sort of fascinating, the blatant politicization, I can't say that word, so I'm not going to try, of the death penalty, and to just say, like, we know that this is going to cost time, money, but really it's human beings. Like, you're talking about a child, victim of childhood sexual abuse, that's going to have this albatross around their neck for decades. And for what? I mean, like, that particular bill is infuriating, because they're just playing games, but they're playing games with children's lives under the guise of protecting them. And it's just absolute nonsense.
What's the public reaction to this, all this nonsense? Yet a reaction, I'm sure, Bridget, you hear from some people that is the public responding at all?
It's really hard. And I'll let Bridget answer too. It's hard to break through the noise. I think when we, obviously in our circles, we've seen more people come to our vigils, more people, reply to our emails. Our lists have grown astronomically. I mean, there's definitely pushback, but I think people aren't as informed as they need to be. And it's hard for the legislators we've had a couple brave legislators push back and say, I'm voting against this, and I know my opponent in the next election is going to say, I don't care about children. Right. And so, like, when they're willing to be brave, we just need to get the people in Florida, I think, to pressure their legislators a little bit more. But we are seeing, I mean, Bridget can talk about sort of our growth and the response. I do think, having these executions every 2 weeks is not something that the everyday Floridian wants. But I'll let Bridget sort of answer on the public reaction.
I would say, I wanted to sort of start by saying that I think it is really sort of unfair, nefarious, sort of all of the things. It is very easy for anybody to agree that somebody who harms a child in that way should be punished. And I think that they silence people by passing these particular laws and stating, if you are against this, then obviously you are, pro child predator. And obviously so much of this is wrapped up in a complex legal system that's compounded by Florida's misunderstanding of the legal system. But what I try to remind people, and what I think resonates, and why people are still joining us, even when we oppose things like bills like that, is that protection is why we can't execute children. That protection is why we shouldn't execute people who are intellectually disabled. It is not an exaggeration to say that in Florida, we were lynching people for looking the wrong way at someone. And certainly in a federal and state government like we have now, if the argument is an eye for an eye, and if the baseline sort of understanding is that the death penalty is there because someone killed a person and therefore they should be killed, that all goes away. And to what extent does it end? And I'm against the death penalty completely, but there's an argument, well, what about adults who suffer sexual violence? And there will always be another argument. What about someone who, whose house is robbed or something like that? And where does it end, and to what benefit? And I think the public is really, I think that they are starting to see that they were sold a false promise, that even at this rate of executions, everyday life isn't better for them. And things are still so violent and so heated that I think on all of the sides, people want to release that anger, that violence at somebody where it's quote unquote easy to do so. And when that doesn't relieve that, I think it really, it throws people off and it makes them question things. And so as we have gotten, I wouldn't say more popular, but as we have gotten a bit more attention, given the state of things, there is a very loud population of people who are very, very angry that it takes 30 years to execute someone. It's not necessarily that they come and they're like, kill all of the people all of the time, but they are questioning it. And that, to me, as a comms person, I love that, because I'm like, it's not that it takes 30 years of appeals. That could have been done 30 years ago. And I made this joke yesterday that I like to collect sort of who I've turned against the death penalty, like Pokemon, because you can just really hit on any part of it. And it's like, and hey, guess what? There are thousands serving life sentences in Florida for equally horrific crimes. Do their victims not matter? Do those families not matter, if that's what this is for? And that really changes people's minds. And I think people respect that we always start with the victim, because that's where this starts. And I think also people want an explanation, or at least part of a reason why. That, and I'll sort of end by saying that, when I came to abolition work, I had always thought that a life without parole sentence, because that's what we have in New York, was worst possible, imaginable. And the more and more that I learned about Florida and how many people were serving life without parole sentences for all sorts of things, it really, really made me wonder just why on earth we would need this system. And I'm really finding that people are starting to see behind the mirage of this is good, this is safe, this is law and order. And it's like, but it's really not those things. And I said that was the last thing, but the final thing is, some people are interested in a certain case, or they are attracted to an innocence issue or someone with severe mental illness. And once they really start to see that case they're really interested in is treated terribly and the person is gone, then they really start to recognize that the whole system has to go. So that's my long-winded way of saying that the public opposition to this is significantly louder. It's hard to compete with, a system like this, but I am every day shocked and in awe of how many more people are with us, how many more people are talking, how many more people are writing things, and it's just amazing. It's the best part of this work, is seeing how many more people every single day come on when I think that they're just going to give up.
I think the execution of Jeffrey Hutcherson on May 1st, who is a Gulf War veteran, I think that really sort of spoke to that. That was the first time we had people who I would call them otherwise either not really paying attention to the system or even probably thought themselves to be pro death penalty once they sort of understood how much our country broke Sergeant Hutchison and then they killed him. The outrage was palpable. I mean, that vigil, I could cry thinking about it. We had veterans come in their full military gear and speak about the combat that they witnessed and just like, I mean, holding the flag. I mean, the pictures from that vigil are just like, you know, and in some ways you're like, well, okay, they killed him anyway. Like it doesn't matter, but it does, right? From that execution, we're building a group of veterans to talk about other executions and to stop other executions. Mississippi executed a Vietnam War veteran last night. And that, I mean, it's like when you start shining a light and you get people who are otherwise either not touched by the issue or they think about, you know, this could have been my brother, this could have been my combat, you know, partner. It's really, really, it's really important. So, I mean, I do think we were able to a little bit get more public opinion there, but it didn't matter in the end.
Well, I think it all matters, but it's a process. Yeah. Marie, in your email to supporters after the execution of Anthony Wainwright earlier this month, you signed off with the words, yours in grief, rage, and strength, which we found so powerful, we used it as the title of this webinar. Mr. Wainwright's execution was particularly ruthless because it was allowed to proceed despite serious flaws in his case. Was that case a particularly difficult one for you, or was it the culmination of the effects of dealing with 7 executions in 5 months?
Yeah, you know, it's a great question. Bridget and I, you know, again, part of this work, and I'm so grateful to get to do it alongside her. And we just have now a new part-time organizer with us who his name's Grace, who's amazing and wonderful. And the three of us get to do this stuff together. But we write these emails sort of the day after, and it's always like, it's time to write the sad email. And like, we don't want to, you know, I mean, the amount of like kicking and screaming sometimes that I will take ownership of it. I'm like, I'm not doing it. I don't want to do it. I'm not doing it. I don't want to say the words. I'm tired. And Bridget's always like, we have to say the words. And I think it was just like, it was a bit of a culmination, but part of it, and Mr. Bell coming up on July 15th is the same. It's like, when the process is so flawed, my anger, especially as a lawyer, right, as a capital defense lawyer, it's like, if you want to kill this guy, like I disagree with you 1,000%, but you should at least make sure that he has a lawyer who's going to do things for him, who's going to stand up and fight for him and make his case heard. And that lawyer didn't see his client for 10 years. And that is just disgusting and shameful. So I think for me, it was a combination of the culmination, but it was the lack of representation, because I can tell you, I have represented so many clients on death row or facing the death penalty, clients that I can't do anything for, couldn't do anything. Our client who was executed in 2013, I knew there was nothing we could do. We fought as hard as we could. We knew we were going to lose him. He was a tremendous human being. I miss him to this day. But the fighting for him mattered, right? The stand up, the going to see him, the doing all the things, even if we can't fix it, like showing up matters. And that is the absolute least that you can do, right? In doing this work. And so I think for me, I was very, very angry and knew that we already, you know, we'd lost Jeffrey Hutchison, and then we had Anthony, and then I knew we had other ones coming up. I mean, there's just so many. It's like, I always make sure that I try to like remember all the names because it's just constant. And so I think it was a combination, but the particulars of Anthony's case, when you have a lawyer who doesn't see their client, is just so offensive to me.
I couldn't agree more. You have some issues coming up with Mr. Bell.
Yes.
And I understand there's a hearing now that
this past Monday, there was an evidentiary hearing. Of course, we were monitoring it as we're preparing for Tommy Godinez's execution. So I missed a little bit of it, but we're catching up on it now. But essentially, Mr. Bell, there was a series, it's basically prosecutorial and police misconduct in Jacksonville in the early 90s. Witnesses were pressured, were threatened, were given special treatment. And the detective on that case has since passed, but the detective and the prosecutor had engaged in this pattern of doing so. And some witnesses came forward saying that they were pressured, that they lied at trial. The one witness said, I only heard it, I didn't see it. They made me testify falsely. So they signed affidavits to this effect, but then they come into court on Monday, and lo and behold, the prosecution won't give them immunity, and they told them, we'll file perjury charges if you say this affidavit is true. Well, perjury carries up to 15 years in prison. And weird, the witnesses were all like, oh, I don't know, just kidding. And so, I mean, that again, like, I think I said that in the email yesterday, it's like, I used to be a prosecutor, right? I started my career as a prosecutor. I'm proud of the work that I did as a prosecutor for 3 years. Like, you're supposed to seek the truth, and you don't want the truth to come out. Again, it's like if we're killing people, you better be absolutely certain that this person did exactly what you said they did if you're going to take their life. And if you're so worried about protecting the integrity of your conviction or your death sentence, or making sure we can rush this execution through in 30 days, that you're not willing to hear what people have to say, it's offensive on so many levels. So, I mean, again, Mr. Bell's lawyers are doing a great job. They put on a really strong case on Monday. There's a lot of support. We'll continue to highlight it and push it. You know, I try really hard to always be hopeful, because that's who I am as a person at my core. I do believe that someday this is going to end, and I'm proud to be a part of it. But do I think the execution will happen? Probably. Unfortunately, the courts seem to continue to turn a blind eye to this. But I mean, if you're in favor of the death penalty, you should be very, very scared that Florida is about to execute someone who either potentially did not commit this crime, or certainly did not commit it in the premeditated manner in which the state is pretending.
Is it the Dozier School? Is that the name of it? Yeah. Is that involved in his case, or is
he was also a Dozier kid? He was there. So Dozier was horrific the entire time until it was shuttered. It was like really bad early on, and then they like reformed it. It was still terrible. I've represented several clients who went to Dozier as well. So he was abused horribly at Dozier. But yeah, it's a school up in the Panhandle. It's since closed, but it's a school in the Panhandle, a wayward school for boys. But it's through the Department of Corrections. So I think that's also the irony of it, right? It's not like parents were just like sending their kids there. These kids were getting sentenced there through the juvenile justice system. So they are being abused at the hands of the state, and now being killed at the hands of the state.
That always rings a bell for me, because my friend Joe Geritano, in a Virginia case that I was involved in for many years, was a victim of the treatment at Dozier School.
Yeah, awful. I mean, some of the stuff that you read there is just heartbreaking.
Hideous. Listen, the work you're doing is really extraordinary, and you've got an appeal out for people to sign a petition on the Bell case. Is that correct?
Yes.
So anybody who's listening to us, if they contact you, you get them information about what's needed for them to add their name.
Yes, we can send that. I don't know if there's a way to put it in the chat, or we can, but yeah, we can absolutely. Or if you send an email, I think with the link to the recording, we can certainly do that as well.
Okay, and I'm wondering how we at DPF and all our supporters can help support you folks for what you're doing. Is there anything that you can think of that we can do?
Yeah, I mean, this is great. Something like this is great to sort of get us out there, to let people know outside of Florida what is happening. And also, I mean, we are a small nonprofit. You're looking at the full-time staff of Floridians for Alternatives to the Death Penalty, and our like budget is primarily donation based. We have some grants that we get, but if people are able to donate, that would be amazing. If you're not, and you know someone who is, also amazing. If you have an event that you want us to speak at, I could talk about the death penalty until I'm blue in the face. So if you have an event in your community and you're like, look, I want stories from the death penalty. I have an exonerated client. He's on our board, Clemente Aguirre. He's one of my most favorite humans in the whole entire world. He spent 14 years on Florida's death row for a crime he didn't commit. I worked on his case for a decade until we got him out. He comes to my house for Christmas Eve dinner every year. And he and I speak. We're speaking at an event at a law school here in September, and we tell our story. And so, we're happy to do that. I'm happy to come and do that. But certainly sign up for our newsletter, sign up for, our events, and donate when and where you can. And if you have people in Florida, if you know somebody in Florida, like, make sure. We really need Floridians, right? We love the support from nationally, internationally. All of that is really, really critical to us. But we also need Floridians to push, because the only way we're going to get to abolition in Florida, or at least stop the violence right now, is for Floridian, our governor needs to hear the pressure from everyday Floridians. So I think that is the message. But our friends nationally and internationally can always help by signing petitions, by speaking out, by sharing our things, and by donating where it can.
Great. If Mary Kate, if some of our viewers have questions, we have time, a little bit of time, perhaps.
Yes, thank you, Mike. I have a question here. Please clarify. Despite the 2016 Supreme Court decision requiring unanimous jury verdicts imposing a death penalty, Florida has in fact executed inmates who were sentenced to death by a non-unanimous verdict. Weren't stays from the Supreme Court sought in those cases?
Yes. So the short answer is yes, they were, and they were rejected for a number of reasons. There's a long history of complicated law about retroactivity, and the courts in general always like things to be neat, tidy packages, and like things to not have to, they're very important about finality. So there was a lot of litigation in those cases saying that that decision in 2016 should be applied retroactively. Our Florida Supreme Court made this very, at the time, which was the pre-DeSantis court, made this very strange demarcation line that said anybody sentenced before 2002, which was when the preceding case, so Hearst was the case in 2016 that said you can't have non-unanimous. It built off of a case called Ring, which was an Arizona case in 2002. Which said that. So basically it took that long for the US Supreme Court to say, yep, Florida, you're wrong too. Our Supreme Court said anybody prior to 2002 is out of luck, sorry. Anybody after 2002 that had a non-unanimous verdict gets a new penalty phase. We have cases.
I'm sorry, did we just lose a voice?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Maria, we just lost you. Is there something we can do about that, folks? Yoko or Mary Kate? I'm sorry, unless you can't hear me, we've lost the voice track here.
We hear you perfectly.
There.
Something tells me it's probably her headphones. I saw her take them out.
Oh,
Maria, can you hear us? Oh, it may be. Can you?
oh, here we are.
There you are.
Yeah, my headphones died in my ears, and so there's a case in Jacksonville. There were 3 co-defendants, all sentenced to death after 2002. So they all got resentenced, new penalty phases, basically. 2 of them got life because they got non-unanimous verdicts the next time through. The 3rd gentleman was set for trial. A hurricane came through. His trial got had to be continued because of his trial. Then the state passed unanimity, and they forced him to go to trial under unanimity, even though he was under the guise. So he just got a death sentence, 8-4. Because, so he has an argument. He has a really strong argument on appeal. Again, it's now to the DeSantis Florida Supreme Court. But there's hundreds of examples of the unfairness of that. But the answer to the question is, yes, people tried, but because the court is so strict on retroactivity, it didn't matter.
And there's this whole constant beef between finality and justice, as far as I can tell.
Right. Exactly. And there's nothing more final than death. So I think that for me, that's what's so frustrating. And it's like, you want finality, but you're okay to kill somebody without, it's absurd. But yeah, that's the law that we live in, unfortunately.
MK, do we have something else?
Yes. This person wonders if Florida is going to continue to use nitrogen gas in executions as opposed to some of the other methods other states are trying.
So yeah, one of the bills that we didn't get to talk about was one of the other troubling bills that was passed this session was a method of executions expansion bill, which we also lobbied very hard against. But Florida passed a law that said the DOC can execute people through any means that has not been declared unconstitutional, which of course there have been no methods declared unconstitutional. They're just ones that, have fallen out of favor. Florida, so what would have to happen is the warden of the Florida State Prison is tasked with choosing the execution method, and he's required to like certify that procedure to the governor every 2 years. So if he wanted to switch from lethal injection to something else, he would have to do that, and then it would of course be litigated. We are obviously mindful of any of that and would be following that. I mean, Florida has a deeply troubling history of botched executions. We set inmates on fire in the electric chair in the late 90s, such that the US Supreme Court was actually poised to find electrocution unconstitutional after flames shot out of Jesse Tafero's head. But then Florida switched to lethal injection, so the appeal became moot, and that was in 2001. So, and then Florida, of course, had the horrific botched execution of Angel Diaz in 2006, which led to a brief moratorium and some litigation there. So the answer is Florida could see anything. I mean, we could see anything. We could see nitrogen gas. We could see firing squad. We could see hanging. I mean, they could bring back anything that they wanted, but they haven't yet. And so I try, sometimes this job is just like a terrible game of whack-a-mole. So I'm trying to just sort of, until and unless there's some new method proposed, I'm that's on the back burner for me of, it's a problem. We argued it was a problem. It's unnecessary. But if they try to bring a new method, I have no doubt that the army of lawyers in this state are ready to tackle it, and us included.
Florida hasn't had a problem getting execution drugs then.
They haven't. Of course, everything is secret, so we don't know where who their source is or where they're getting it from. They are the only state in the country that uses etomidate as its first drug. We are one of the few that does the 3-drug protocol, which is, of course, really deeply problematic because of the use of the paralytic. I mean, just as an aside, the American Veterinary Association disallows animal euthanasia in the way that we kill our human beings here.
You mentioned Jesse Tafero, his execution. Jesse's common law wife, I think, Sunny, just passed away, being a campaigner against the death penalty for so many years.
Sunny has she created a house in Florida, Sunny's house, for exonerees. And my client, Clemente, we were able to get him a room there. So when he was exonerated, he was in my car, which was amazing. We drove him to Tampa, and he stayed at Sunny's house for like a year until he got on his feet. And so Bridget and I participated in a podcast with a British news outlet last week to talk about Sunny and her legacy in Florida. And was a remarkable, remarkable advocate.
Indeed.
Will they continue?
Yes. The woman who runs it, her name is Dorothy. She's great. Yeah, they're continuing. We're trying to do our fundraiser. We do a mid-year fundraiser that we're putting together now, and we're gonna donate some of our proceeds that we make in our fundraiser to the Sunny House, just because it's in honor of her passing, and also, again, it's such a place that's near and dear to me. I mean, it literally housed Clemente for a year.
And Mary Kate, do we have any more questions from
I do. I have another one here. Have you established that one or more inmates who were executed were factually innocent?
So in Florida, the best one I can point to is Frank Lee Smith. He was not executed. He died of natural causes on death row. He was posthumously exonerated. In Texas, Cameron Willingham was executed and is very much believed to be innocent based on faulty science in arson investigation. There's a number of other states. Tennessee had a person that was executed that they're seeking posthumous DNA testing, and I don't know the status of that. In Florida, we had 30 exonerees. We lead the country in the number of death row exonerees. And in terms of innocents executed, when we say like factually, I mean, in terms of like a DNA or exact exoneration, I don't know that I can say that Florida has had one specifically in that sense, but certainly ones that have died on death row before they were exonerated.
Well, the Jesse Tafero's case would be in question, would it not? Because Sunny was
yes. Yeah, and I don't know enough about the facts of that to sort of say so, but I mean, I would find it hard to believe that we have not executed somebody who is innocent, or at least executed somebody who is innocent of the death penalty, right? Because there's both of those things, right? There maybe they factually committed a crime, but the only, at least until this year, the only thing you were allowed to be executed for is the commission of first degree premeditated murder. So there's certainly folks who have been innocent of the death penalty. I mean, you could in Florida, you could be executed if you're the like getaway driver. I mean, if you participate in a felony murder and you're the getaway driver, you're just as guilty.
Yeah, that's participant involvement. That's, anything else, Mary Kate?
Yes, this person says, as much as I abhor the death penalty, I wonder about the rationale for using execution drugs. This is especially true considering how many people die from overdoses of fentanyl and other opioids. So,
I'll ask kind of a clarifying question, and if they want to type back in the chat, are we saying that like we think it should be a different method, or that they should like instead of using these sort of like medical drugs, that we should be using some of the other drugs that we know are sort of accidentally killing people? I'm not certain I understand the question. I want to make sure I answer it correctly. So
I have the same confusion, but what I'm guessing is because this person abhors the death penalty that they're thinking execution drugs are abhorrent because they are medical
yeah,
supposedly.
I mean, I think that's right. I mean, look, it's very strange because as a lawyer doing lethal injection litigation or any kind of methods litigation, the US Supreme Court has required us to identify an alternative, to say like, no, kill me this way, not that way, which is very disturbing as a lawyer to have that conversation with your client. But I mean, certainly I agree that like we shouldn't be using drugs that are supposed to help people. And that, I mean, that happened in Missouri. They wanted to switch to propofol, and the manufacturers of propofol basically said, if you switch to that as your execution drug, we will stop supplying your state with propofol for surgery. And they didn't, they didn't switch. And I mean, I think that's really, no patient wants to be like, wait, they're giving me pentobarbital. Isn't that how they kill people? Like, how are you sure you're not going to give me too much? And I mean, there are other states, we could talk a long time about what is the sort of most humane way to kill someone. I mean, there are other states, Oregon does physician assisted suicide. I mean, there's definitely ways that it could be done that don't involve drugs, like the intravenous injection of drugs, but it's just really difficult.
Yeah, but the fundamental question is whether or not we have the right to put someone to death.
Right.
It's really not a matter of how we do it so much as,
Right.
for example, we're raising the idea that somebody could happily overdose on some drug that would make them feel good.
Yeah, I mean, yes, but I guess I will say I agree with that 100%. And also like as a lawyer, I would love to be able to tell my client that they're not going to suffer.
Well, of course.
And so that is it definitely, and I see in the chat that was basically that other drugs would be more humane. And I think that's right. I mean, I think the answer is yes, there are definitely other drugs that are more humane. And it's just part of this weird dance that we have around how we're going to kill people. And we want to make it as sort of pristine as possible, I think.
Sure. And that was the original justification for lethal injection. It was
Right.
supposed to be you're calmly put to sleep. And what we've now discovered is that it's anything but that.
Yeah.
We could end on this nice note. How do you stay positive and deeply engaged in this work, especially when you're constantly facing frustration, secrecy, and often heartbreaking information?
I will answer, and then I want Bridget to answer too, so I'll make sure I give her the time. For me personally, I try to do things with people that I love. I teach yoga, which is my most favorite thing in the whole world to do. It is the one thing that consistently brings me joy. I spend time with my partner, with my pets, with my family. I climb really large mountains and try to have a work-life balance where I can. And being able to do this very hard job with people that I love and getting to work with Bridget has just been an absolute gift. I see so much of myself in her from 20 years ago. I try really hard to give her things that I wish I knew at that age. But I also am really heartened that she wants to do this work. So surrounding myself with people that I love is how we get through.
I will just say, and this is actually not just to thank Death Penalty Focus, but I know Mary Kate and Yoko know that my first time being at FADP, our former executive director, Mark Elliott, who is so one of my favorite people and friends, said, you have to work with Death Penalty Focus. They are the best. They are our best partners. And for everybody who does not know this, once the Donald Dilbeck warrant was signed, Mary Kate Yoko sent it out to everybody. We would not have the list that we have now without Death Penalty Focus. And I want to say that because I would rather erase all of the death penalty stuff, but I wouldn't erase the people that I've met along the way. Maria brought up Michael Zach before. I have the joy of getting to talk to his sister once a week and hear about her grandchild, and the joy of knowing Herman Lindsay, who I know that you all know, which has been the greatest gift of my entire life. And I didn't grow up faithful, so I am now surrounded by people who are really full of faith, which has just been an amazing experience. And so the same things that Maria said, it's hard. I'm also a very big feeler for everything. And at first it was, so I had to really ask whether I could do something like this or not. And then I realized that the people that were around me, Herman, Michael's sister, Maria, that they used that pain and made something better out of it. And when I was 16 and lost my grandma, which is probably just the hardest thing that's happened to me, I was like, I'm never going to do anything with this pain. I'm just going to sit in this pain for forever. This pain will end me. And I can't imagine where I'd be now if I didn't say, all right, you felt that. It's time to now use that. You can use that to do something good. And so I tell everybody that I hate this work, but I love this work so much because you are like surrounded by people who have no reason to be here other than just caring about humanity and wanting to make things better. And that's always what I've wanted to do, whether it was in the ocean or Broadway or wherever I ended up. I just wanted to make life a little bit better for some people. And so whenever we send an email, like Maria said, and we're like, oh my gosh, it was horrible. I never want to write another sad word. And then just the outpour of support comes, and we're not ego people. So it's like, sometimes I'm like, stop. But it is just, and then I'm like, well, now here we go again. Now I have to go because we have this whole team of people. So, I'll go play with my 3 lizards, which I'll let you guys know that's how I've been coping. Is I've been breeding small gargoyle geckos to Maria's displeasure. So I'm a big animal person. So that's a big part. My mom is very kind to allow me to have a gaggle of squirrels outside that I regularly feed blueberries and lizards, and my cat who's 18 pounds. It's hard to do that. I don't have a partner yet, but that's it. And doing stuff like this. This has genuinely been the highlight of this week. The kindness shown. And that's what I really want to just put out, and is just like, treat people with kindness. The kindness DPF has shown allows FADP to show more kindness, and it's just a really encouraging and amazing experience.
Well, bless you both. I'm continually saying, and I don't mean to be redundant, but this is, I find myself associated with the finest, most decent, most thoughtful, and most caring people in this work. And the most courageous, I must say, to face this pain and this grief and this misery that we suffer at the losses that continue to be very much a part of our experience in this work. But the unwillingness to bend, the unwillingness to just give in to cynicism and give up and throw it all away is extraordinarily inspiring to me. So thank you for what you do and the way in which you do it. And to all of you listening, these 2 are heroes.
Thanks, Mike. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Bridget. Thank you, Maria.